Hey everybody, today's video is about the idea of push and crash, which basically means that you have tried your best to accomplish things in your everyday life, and as a result of physically pushing your body too hard, you end up overcompensating and having to rest more than you would like, and you're out of commission and having to recover for a long period of time. The other day, one of my followers reached out to me and asked for some tips on how to avoid this as much as possible because, I think it's natural for people with chronic illness to want to function as normally as possible, but often it's something that we want in our minds but can't physically meet the expectations for in reality because of our own physical illnesses and limitations. Since I've been sick my whole life, which is more than 30 years, I have a ton of things in place for me in my everyday situation that helps me accomplish the things that I need to in order to function and to contribute to society and feel like I am having a fulfilling experience without being held back as much as I could be by my autoimmune disease. The first thing that I'll say, which I think sort of is an umbrella for everything that I'm about to say after this, is that the best thing that has worked for me in being successful as an independent person living with a chronic illness is the fact that I plan everything out in my life. I think it has come across as though I'm a control freak, and it's one of those things that I think I'm not really sure which came first, like sort of like a chicken and the egg scenario where it's like I don't know if I naturally was someone who is very type A and that helps the fact that I'm chronically ill, or if being chronically ill makes me more of someone who's organized and controlling just for a means of survival. With that being said, whichever one it is, it definitely helps me, and it's the reason that I am able to function as independently as I am as a single 33-year-old living in New York City, working full-time and managing a more than full-time chronic illness on an everyday basis. Of course, I could stop the video right here and just say, you're welcome. That's the best tip that I have, is to just be organized. But I think that it would really be a disservice to all of you if I didn't give you the more specific things that help me in my day-to-day, which you might not think of, or you might think of but just not know how to execute. For me, some of the things that have helped me stay organized include making lists, writing things down. Sometimes I forget things, so it's really good for me to have a reference to go back to. And then also, I'm like a super geek, and it's really helpful for me when I write something down and get it done, because then when I check something off or wipe it off of my list, then I feel a sense of accomplishment, like I've actually done something. I know it probably sounds like a small thing, but having a day filled with mini victories that end up leading to the greater victory of getting, everything done, or as much done as you possibly can, makes it a whole lot more motivating and easier to wake up tomorrow and do it all over again, especially if you are in physical pain and don't know how you're going to accomplish anything. Something else that I find incredibly helping when trying to get stuff done every day is to make things as fun as possible. Basic tasks, as many of you know, can be really daunting and difficult and taxing physically when you are already dealing with some kind of chronic illness. And it seems like, everybody else is able to get these things done, but for us, it takes a whole lot of effort and energy that other people have naturally that we don't have naturally most times. So for example, music is a huge part of my life. I am a drummer, and I've been listening to a whole bunch of different kinds of music since I was a little kid, and I have a degree in music, so it's very much something that I'm passionate about and sort of makes me feel alive when it's in my life. So for example, if I go to the grocery store, I might have headphones in with some of my favorite upbeat music on, or if I'm at home working out or preparing lunches for the week or whatever, I tend to have music blasting in the background too, because it gives you that extra boost of energy and enthusiasm, and it makes the time go by quicker in a situation that, again, you could be physically uncomfortable in. Something else that I think has been really helpful for me, which can come across as pessimistic or negative, which really in this case it isn't, is trying to imagine the worst case scenario before you do anything. So for example, the reference that I use a lot in these situations or conversations is, if you are someone that wants to go to the mall, think about everything that could potentially go wrong at that trip to the mall as it relates to your illness that you can avoid or plan for before you even leave your home. Again, this isn't about a self-fulfilling prophecy or just always looking at the bad things that could potentially happen just because you are a cynical person. It's really just about planning the best way that you possibly can, so when you do end up in the environment that you are going to be in, you're ready for anything that comes at you. So for me, as someone who has a physical disability or physical disabilities because I have arthritis in every joint in my body, a simple trip to the mall is like potentially horrifying for me because there's so many things that can go wrong in that situation. If I'm driving, I think about things like, will there be parking? Is it a busy time of day? Will there be a lot of people there? Will I be able to get a parking spot? Will I be able to get a parking spot close enough to the store that I need to go to? If there's a parking garage, is there an elevator? Is there only stairs? Like, what physically is going to potentially cause me problems before I even get inside the store? I also like to consider the people that I'm going with because naturally, since I was a little kid, I'm someone whose fallback really was to hide when I wasn't feeling well, and then I ended up inadvertently overdoing it in certain situations because I didn't want to ever speak up or be a burden on the people around me. So I would end up putting myself in these physically stressful situations, and because I didn't want to bother anybody, I would end up making it worse and overdoing it and being in a ton of physical pain while I was experiencing whatever it was I was experiencing, like walking around the mall with a group of friends. Which is another reason why I do like to anticipate any issues in advance, especially if it's people that I'm not comfortable necessarily speaking up about or around, because I want to know, once I get inside the mall, will there be seats? How big is the mall? Are the stores that we're going to go to close to each other? Do we know where those stores are? Are we going to spend half of our time walking around just to find places that we could potentially look up in advance? What kind of medication will I need to take while I'm there? How long will we be there? If I'm there at X hour, is this the time that I take this medication? Do I need to plan out taking pain medication surrounding the time that we leave? Like, everything ends up having to be really timed out. If I take certain medication like prednisone, I usually need to eat with that. Is there food available at the location that we're going to? Is there food available that I feel comfortable eating that isn't going to hurt my stomach? And so, like I said, for me, the more that I know in advance and the better that I plan in advance, the easier it'll be for me to have fun. Because if I'm in a situation where all of the things that I just brought up are swirling around in my brain as they're happening, I'm not going to enjoy myself in the moment. One of my greatest flaws growing up, and I'm trying to get better with as I'm becoming older and more comfortable in certain situations, is I have had an extreme inability to be present in certain situations because I'm always sort of worrying about or anticipating what's happening next in an effort to make sure that I don't put myself in a physically harmful or uncomfortable position. So more of the work that you put in up front or before you're going to an event or doing anything outside of your home, the better it'll be for you in the long run, because you will hopefully avoid having to overextend yourself because you will have already planned out whatever you need to do physically in order to get through the day. I think probably the most useful piece of information that I have, though, about being able to utilize your body the best way that you possibly can and preventing yourself from overdoing it, is taking advantage of the moments that your body is like ready to roll. One of the greatest issues that I have faced in my life, especially when it comes to working full-time and having a very stressful and involved full-time career, is that society expects you to work around certain hours of the day. And what that means is if you have a job that's 9 to 5, you have to be physically on from the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but that might not be when your body is functioning at its best, unfortunately. I tend to be a night person, so for me, I tend to get boosts or bursts of energy at night or in the middle of the night, and it's always irritating to me because I'm like, great, now is when I feel great, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and that does nothing for me at work. But it does give me the opportunity to get things done around my apartment that I might not feel well enough to do when I just get home from work at 6 o'clock at night, such as cleaning or organizing or walking the dog or making my bed or things like that. I tend to utilize those moments every time that they come up because in that moment or in those moments, my body is working with me and I don't have to work against it to get certain tasks done. And so, as a result, two things are happening. Since you're sort of going with the tide, like you're going in the natural direction that your body wants to go to, you're not working against it. So you're exerting half the amount of energy that you would have to exert if you were working against your body. And also, I feel like I get twice as much done because I actually have the energy to do it. There's obviously a built-in downside to this, which is the fact that I almost never sleep. And I think that is probably harmful to my overall health and how I feel when I wake up for work in the morning or whatever. But again, I also believe that if I didn't take advantage of these opportunities when they come to me, when I can't expect them to show up, I feel like if I didn't do that I wouldn't be able to get the things done in my life that I need to get done. So I feel like it's a catch-22, but it ends up benefiting me in the long run because my goal is to, again, be as functional as possible in society as an independent sick person. The next thing I'll say is similar to sort of forecasting any bad things that could potentially happen, but it's a little bit different. It's basically anticipating or prioritizing the things that you need to get done and make sure that you set hard limits and boundaries when you're in these situations so you don't end up overdoing it because you feel obligated to get everything done by everybody else's timeline. Something that I say all the time is that when you're chronically ill, you really need to be very self-aware and understand who you are and what your physical limits are and listen to them when those limits are speaking up inside of your brain. So for example, if you have a weekend coming up and on you work full time and your career is super important to you and you know that first thing Monday morning you have a large presentation to give at work, but you also know that on Sunday you have some sort of family function for a relative's birthday or whatever it is, some kind of event that you also would like to go to. A way to avoid burning out is to be super honest with yourself and sitting down and deciding what your priority actually is. And this can often feel super difficult because prioritizing sometimes feels like a no-win situation because while you do think something might be a little bit more important, it doesn't mean that the other thing isn't important. And so people around you might not understand that. You might feel guilty. People might think that you're neglecting responsibilities or that you're disassociating yourself from the people that are important to you in your life and that you are important to in their lives. I'm at the point in my life where I know what my limits are, and I know that in order to be happy, it's important for me not to physically overdo it because then that actually makes me seclude more and become depressed when I need to recover from situations like that. So I have become really good at being honest about what I believe I can do and what I can expect out of myself and communicating to other people, the reality of what's happening to me and making sure that I don't overcommit to something that I don't believe I'll be able to fulfill when the time actually comes. So that ends up putting me sort of in a positive position most of the time because if I'm invited to a family function and it's right after an infusion or I know that I have a busy week coming up or whatever it is, I will say, you know what, I'll see how I'm feeling and I'll let you know. So they don't have this expectation that you're going to show up. But if you are able to show up, at the last minute, people are excited that you're able to be there, which is sort of, a win if you think about it. We never know how we're going to feel on a day-to-day basis, so I feel like it's more irresponsible to say, oh yeah, this is important to me, I definitely want to go, and then end up having to back out at the last minute because people don't understand that that's not something that is within your control. So it's probably better to err on the side of caution and not have them expect that you'll be present for something that you could potentially have to back out of at the last minute. Now, like I said, there are also times when you have things come up that you need to prioritize, but sometimes you can't necessarily decide which of the two things is more important because it would be offensive or negatively perceived, and in a warranted and rightfully so way, if you don't show up for one of the two things. So there are ways to actually manage it so you can do both. But again, you have to be very self-aware of what your boundaries are and make sure that you put them in place and follow them when the time comes. I personally tend to have a rule, because I'm someone that works full-time, that I will try my best to leave open 1 out of the 2 days every weekend just to lay around and chill out and let my body decompress and prepare for the next week coming up, which means that my rule is that I, as much as I possibly can, try not to schedule things for Saturday and Sunday, because I get anxiety about what that will mean for me physically, and then ultimately I won't have fun at either thing that I've planned because I'll be worrying too much about what that will mean for my recovery time. But a good example of how I balance things like that is like around the holiday time, for example. My family lives about an hour and a half away from me. I'm in New York City and they live out in Long Island. It's really difficult for me to travel out to Long Island and, sleep over my parents' house and bring my dog and, let's say for Christmas, bringing Christmas gifts and like doing all of that. That takes a lot of emotional and mental energy out of me to plan for something like that. So since it is important to my parents that I am present for certain holidays, even though I have backed out of certain things as they've come up, because I care more about feeling okay, my compromise is usually, okay, I will come out and stay with you guys and do the whole holiday thing for a couple of days at your house, but my sacrifice might be that I won't from that point go to the next family member's house to celebrate on the actual holiday. So I might say to my parents, listen, my compromise is this. I'll come out with the dog, we'll stay with you guys or whatever. If you want to go to Uncle so-and-so's house or Aunt so-and-so's house, feel free to do it, but that will be too much for me physically. And I make my expectations clear and let them know that I will be going back to New York City at this point in time. Again, if it is super important that I go to, the next family member's house or whatever it is, I have clear boundaries set there as well, where I will say, listen, I'll do it, but since it's going to be so physically taxing for me, I'll only do it if A, I have off the next day from work, B, if I'm able to bring my own food so I'm not getting any kind of stomach issue, and C, if we agree as a family to leave this relative's house by X time, because that's all I will be able to physically and then by default emotionally and mentally handle at that point. I think the problem is that a lot of people go into certain situations and say, oh, I have this family event and whatever, and it ends up taking the whole day, and they end up eating all this crap that they wouldn't normally be eating, so potentially they feel worse because of that, and then at the end of the day they end up having to rush back home and they haven't prepared for work for the week, and the whole 9 yards. It ends up snowballing into a bigger issue than it needs to be. But again, if you really evaluate the situation and say, okay, how can I make the situation work for me, then you are able then to be present for more things, but then also understand that your boundaries are there and they are real, and you have to listen to them. Because if you're in the certain situation and you're like, oh man, I'm having so much fun, I don't need to go back at this point, for me, 9 times out of 10, that'll always mean disaster, because since I didn't listen to my body and I didn't stick to my original game plan, I usually end up regretting it down the road. Another thing that I sort of alluded to before is, if you're working full time or just exist on a day to day basis full time, finding the moments where you will naturally have the most energy and repurposing it for things to plan the upcoming days will be extremely helpful. So, for example, for me, I said before I'm a night person, which then also means I'm not a morning person. So getting up in the morning for work is really difficult for me, because that is when my medical condition is at its worst. My arthritis is the worst. I'm stiff, I'm achy. It takes me a little while for medications to kick in the morning that help me function. And so it would be really careless and irresponsible for me to not shower the night before, not prep my lunches the night before, not make sure I have clean clothes the night before. Because as much as I could easily say when I go to bed, oh, whatever, I'll take care of it in the morning, I wake up the next morning and it's a complete disaster again, because I don't feel well and I'm pissed off that I have to get ready for work and sort of fit in with this range of hours that doesn't work for me, that works with the rest of society. And so a really good rule of thumb, a good piece of advice that you can always have in your back pocket is, whenever you're making decisions or putting something off or trying to decide if you should or shouldn't do something, ask yourself this: is this decision in this moment something that my future self will be pissed off at my present self about? So like I always say, sort of jokingly, I don't want to do something that future Becky will hate present Becky for. So it might take a little bit more energy on Sundays to go grocery shopping and prepare meals for the week, or lay out clothes or make sure everything's clean or washed or make my bed or whatever it is. But the little extra energy that I'll have to put in on that Sunday will then pay off for the entire following week, when going to work every day for 8 or 9 or 10 hours is certainly not going to afford me the opportunity to do those things when I get home at night, because the only thing I want to do when I get home from work is lay down in my bed and never move ever again. If you have to, if this is something that would help you visually, sit down, take some time and lay out sort of a calendar or a grid of the hours of the day and what the days of the week are, and sort of highlight what your hot zones are, meaning like times of day that you could potentially be most productive, and maybe what your down zones are, when you know that because of your illness, those hours will probably be the times of day that you won't be really that productive. It should really cause a few things to happen. First of all, it'll make you have to think about what your best times of day are, so you don't keep relying on times that ultimately will fail you every single time. Also, it sort of makes yourself accountable to adhere to what information that you already know. I find that being informed, even if that information is about yourself, is super helpful, because unless we really think and sit down and analyze what will and won't work for us, it'll really all just be something that's fuzzy and flying around in the air, and maybe you'll get lucky and maybe you won't. But if you go into every day saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to stay in bed until whatever time, usually in the early afternoon is when I feel most functional, so I'm going to plan to go grocery shopping at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, rather than laying around binge watching TV all day and then trying to accomplish grocery shopping at 6 o'clock at night, when really you should already know that 6 o'clock at night is the time that you don't feel so great. So you don't want to set yourself up for failure. And by avoiding setting yourself up for failure, you are then, again, by default, setting yourself up to be more productive and to not overdo it in situations that you could have potentially avoided overdoing it in. Another tip is try to, as much as you can, automate as much of your life as possible. Meaning whatever you can set in place that will automatically occur without you having to have the manpower to manually remember it will ultimately save you some time and trouble down the road also. So for example, most of our cell phones have alarm clocks or calendars or calendar reminders, things like that, they don't need to just be used for major things like, oh, my cousin's wedding is coming up in 3 months, or I have a doctor's appointment on this day. I add the dumbest stuff to my calendar. Like, if I know I need to mail rent, I'll put that on my calendar. Or if I have a manicure appointment set up, I'll put it on my calendar. Or even more silly, if I know that I have an infusion coming up and I want to make sure that I change the sheets on my bed before that happens, I'll put a calendar reminder on for myself, because these are the things that seem like they aren't such a big deal, but in my experience and from what I have experienced being chronically ill, for me, it's always the little things that add up that become a bigger problem for me ultimately in the big picture. And again, going back to planning the crap out of your life, when you check off these little things and you're able to plan for them and around them, they tend not to give you issues that make you have to react. If you're proactive and not reactive, it'll ultimately help your state of mind as well. For me, a lot of my physical stress is brought on by mental stress. I give myself a lot of anxiety about things that I should have or could have gotten done that I really waited too long to take care of and have to do at the last minute. Also, in a similar vein of automating things, I live in a big city, so it's pretty easy for me and reasonable for me to find things that help me out physically. But even if you're not living in a big city, like I could go to the grocery store and have my groceries delivered for free in most places, or for a few dollars. But even if you don't live in a big city, Amazon.com is everywhere. So it's not difficult to order toiletries, or to not have to physically go to the store if you need new bedding or new curtains or a pot that you burned your potatoes in on Saturday. There are ways to again, automate processes in your life that help in aiding everyday functions that you don't have to physically be present for, that help as far as just like with a click of a mouse, you can get a lot done. And honestly, again, living in New York City, it ends up saving me a lot of money because I can't walk very far, so I take a lot of cabs. And also, prices for a lot of things are expensive in New York City. So going on Amazon.com or any of the other online vendors, Walmart, whatever, you end up getting a better deal anyway a lot of the time. And then finally, and probably most obviously, listen to your body. Like I said earlier, I tend to dedicate at least one of my 2 days every weekend, if not both days, to really just being laid back and not expecting too much out of myself physically, because I, A, want to recover from the week I just had, and B, want to physically prepare for the week that I have coming up. Both are super important, because when you continue to overdo it and overexert yourself and overplan out your days and your time, you end up leaving yourself with a deficit of energy, and it's much harder to be able to accomplish getting the things done in your life that you need to take care of when you're chronically ill, because you're already starting off with a deficit in most cases, and then also adding to that deficit by not getting the proper rest or mental rehab that you need. Like I said earlier, for me, a lot of my physical stress comes from not mentally shutting down enough. So I probably do it too often just because I find it really helpful. But simply doing nothing ends up benefiting me tenfold. Knowing your body, knowing what causes triggers for feeling like crap, that's also a super important thing to be aware of and to be in tune with. Like for me, since I have arthritis in every joint in my body, I really have to avoid sugars and especially salt, because having a ton of salt or even a normal amount of salt for other people causes me to get more inflammation. It makes me more tired. I feel nauseous. I get headaches, and I have like much less bank of energy available to me if I don't eat as clean as possible. That's something that's very specific to me. That might not matter for other people, but most people have, especially with chronic illness, have sensitivities to certain food, whether you're diabetic and need to avoid sugars, or like me, need to avoid salt, or if you get chronic migraines and something that you eat triggers a migraine, or even taking food out of it. If you know that if you will get a migraine if you don't get if you don't get at least 6 hours of sleep every night. Give yourself 6 hours of sleep every night. Make sure that you put yourself in the best position possible, even though it's not as easy to do all the time. If you put yourself in the best position possible to not fail, like I said, then hopefully by planning and really considering all the things I discussed in this video, you'll be able to get a lot more done without feeling like you need to recover from it constantly. Oh, and you know what? Also, something else that I think is really helpful for me that I actually just remembered is getting as much as you can in your home set up that aids with your physical function. So I have a lot of silly things around my apartment. I wouldn't go as far as to say I have like medical aids, because I think that's like a very kitschy, trendy topic that I'm not really interested in buying into. I'm not super interested in sporting like 50 different colors of fog masks and all of that kind of stuff. I think that the focus is on the wrong thing in those situations. But for me, in order to function every day, I have a bench in my shower so I can sit when I'm washing myself. I have these rubber grippers that I put them in my drawers and in various places in my apartment, because my wrists and my hands have arthritis in them, like I've mentioned, and those grippers help me with opening bottle caps and jars and things that actually you wouldn't even expect having issues with. I have issues with, so I leave those things all over the place. So if I'm having a difficult time, I could just reach in and grab one and continue on as though nothing were holding me back. I find it really important to get lightweight bedding. Not for for anything to do with sleeping necessarily, but for the purpose of making my bed. I bought a beautiful duvet cover from West Elm a few months ago that I loved, but because the fabric was such high quality and so heavy, it was a heavy duty velvet fabric, it was extremely difficult for me to make my bed, and I had to return it. It sucked, and I was bummed out because I really liked what I had purchased, but ultimately if it doesn't work for me functionally, there's no reason for me to hang on to it, because nothing is worth perpetuating physical pain that you could potentially avoid. Paying attention to the early warning signs that you are about to overdo it is also really important. I'm someone who, when I'm motivated to get something done, I push myself. And what ends up happening is maybe like 3/4 of the way through, let's say I'm cooking for a bunch of hours for work for the following week. On a Sunday, I'm cooking. Let's say after, a certain period of time, I start to notice that I'm shifting around on my legs a lot, or that my back is starting to hurt, or that I'm starting to feel dizzy, or whatever it is. If I know that I only have a little bit more to go, I'll be like, whatever, I'm not like at the breaking point yet. I'm just going to keep pushing myself. And the reason that I historically would do that is because I want to get done whatever it is I needed to get done without delaying it even more than it could potentially be delayed. However, rationally speaking, if you think about it, and what I learned a few years ago is that if I'm getting those warning signs, like if I'm having trouble standing, or if I'm feeling like extremely achy and tired and like I'm about to crash, it's much more productive for me to admit to that and be aware of that, take a break, lay down for a little bit, maybe watch TV for a half hour, and let my body sort of recover from what's starting to progress. And that short period of time gives me enough energy back where I feel better. I'm able to finish out the task. It might have, I had a half hour or an hour built back into what I anticipating taking, for the time that it would take to do whatever task it was. But not doing that and not listening to my body and not giving my chance to have like a mini recovery session ultimately hurts me worse in the end, because if you do push yourself past a certain point, it becomes quickly a point of no return. And if you get to that point, you ultimately could hurt yourself enough, or make yourself so physically uncomfortable that you don't get the task done at all because it happened before you were finished with what you were doing. Or you might end up making yourself miserable for the next 3 days because you overdid it, ultimately because you didn't take a break. And so it's really important to know sort of what your warning signs for that point of no return is, and not waiting for the point of no return, because a point of no return is exactly that. Once you get to that point where you shut down, your body is then going to have to be in sort of rest and recovery mode. You're not going to be able to get in a quick 30-minute or hour break to sort of re-energize and get back into the mix. You're done. That's it. You can't go back. Do not collect go. Go directly to jail. Do not collect go. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. At that point, you have basically put yourself in a situation that you can't come back from in a way where you can continue to carry on in a way that you need to fulfill whatever your own expectation was. Really taking the time to take a step back, understand yourself, understand your illness, and understand how your illness impacts and affects you specifically is the most important and useful information that you could possibly gather and rely on when trying to figure out what your actual physical limits are. And it's also important to not rely on what you see on social media or even WebMD about what other people experience, because other people aren't you. And you could have a symptom that doesn't really affect you that much and push through it, where other people might be debilitated. Or you can have a symptom that other people don't experience that much that makes you completely incapacitated if you push too far. So I hope you found all of this information helpful and useful. If you want any more tips or tricks on how to navigate specifically for people with arthritis, because that's what I deal with the most in my life with my disease, feel free to reach out to me directly. And like I said, as always, just make sure that you're listening to your body and that you know how to protect yourself in a way that helps you live as functionally and happily as possible in your life.